Welcome to the Not Your Average Runner podcast. If you're a woman who is midlife and plus sized and you want to start running but don't know how or if it's even possible, you're in the right place. Using proven strategies and real life experience, certified running and life coach Jill Angie shares how you can learn to run in the body you have right now.
Hey Rebels! You are listening to episode number 25 of the Not Your Average Runner podcast. I'm your host, Jill Angie, and we have another amazing interview today with none other but one of my own coaches and mentors, Brooke Castillo. For those of you who don't know Brooke, she is a master certified life coach. She's the founder of the Life Coach School, which is where I trained, and she's also the host of the wildly popular Life Coach School podcast. She's dedicated to helping people change their lives one thought at a time. And through this process, through her work in the world, she has impacted hundreds of thousands of people by doing what she does. And many of the principles that I teach, for example, about managing your inner mean girl and learning to love your body, are things that I learned directly from Brooke. She's literally changed my life with her teachings, and I am so excited to share all of her knowledge with you today. Now, real quick, before we get to the interview, I have something awesome for you. If you're a fan of Enel bras, and you know I am, you can now get free shipping on all your online orders from their website if you use the code JILLSHIP at checkout. That's JILLSHIP. Use it at checkout, and boom, free shipping on all your orders. There you go. You can find all of the Enel products at enel.com. And of course, for running, the one that I recommend the most is the Enel Sport. Now, without further ado, I am so excited to introduce you to Brooke Castillo.
Hey everyone, I am super excited to bring you a very special guest this week. And this week, I have one of my all-time favorite people, a woman who I credit her with changing my life in so many ways. She's just completely magical and amazing, and her name is Brooke Castillo.
Holy cow.
So, I know, right? You told me to talk about how much I love you. So
what
I'm doing
it. I love it. I'll come anytime.
Yeah. And so she's she really, no joke. She has changed my life in so many ways and made me a much better person. And I felt like I needed to share her wisdom with you. So we are going to talk with Brooke Castillo today about all kinds of stuff. And for those of my listeners that don't know the magic that is Brooke Castillo, Brooke, welcome. And could you give us a short summary of who you are, what you do, why you do it? Tell us everything.
Yes. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for such a nice intro. It's so interesting whenever I hear people talk about any of my students or any of my clients that talk about, oh my gosh, my life's so much better because of Brooke. I always feel like it's not because of me, right? It's because you applied the tools that we have. And I know that sounds like I'm just trying to be humble. It's really not. Like, I already think I'm amazing. So we know that. Right? But this really is about like having the magical tools, having the tools of understanding how our brain affects everything in our life, including our bodies and what we're able to do with them and how we show up in the world. So that is really what I'm about. My work and the secret magic that I have is the self-coaching model, which we may or may not talk about today, but that really is, to summarize it, and what all my work is about is understanding that our thoughts create our reality and our thoughts create our results in our lives. So anytime where I'm able to talk about that, introduce that concept to anyone, and maybe some of your listeners don't know about that yet, I am thrilled to do so.
We are so going to get all up in that today.
Do it.
For sure. Because it really is magic. It's like one of those things when you realize that's the secret, like that's it. Like that's really the only tool you need. So my listeners spend a lot of time really working and focusing on their physical health between running and cross training and, nutrition and so forth, like always trying to be the most fit version of themselves that they can be. So they really get that concept of striving to get stronger and fitter. And I know that you have that very same philosophy towards mental health or mental fitness. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it's hard for me to separate them out, right? Because I feel like all of the work that we do on our physical fitness requires so much mental fitness to be able to do it, right? Because there's so much chatter going on in our brains, so much instant gratification our brain is constantly trying to talk us into. Like, for example, I would guess with your runners, it's like, it doesn't matter if you run today. Doesn't matter if you get your shoes on and get dressed and go out there, you'll do it tomorrow. Like all of that kind of talk will affect your physical health. So I feel like when you focus on your mental health, the physical health becomes much easier. But I think you can approach both of them in the same way. And we don't usually think about our mental health in terms of reps and practice and building up our fitness level, but that really is how our mental health needs to be approached and treated. Because what happens is we start looking inside of our brains, and I will say, I think this is actually kind of fascinating when I think about the work that you do. One of the things about running, if you don't have headphones in, I don't run because I think it's hard. You can coach me on that later.
We've had that conversation. It is hard.
I walk very consistently all of the time. And one of the things that I notice when I'm walking is all of the brain dialogue and all of the sentences and all of the things that are just streaming through my head. And so I really do feel like running is a great opportunity for you to get a peek into your mental health. And when you're running, what are you noticing is going on in there? What are you noticing that you're saying to yourself? What are you thinking about? What do you spend the majority of your time thinking about without supervision? It's similar to the physical health in terms of what do you spend most of your time doing, right? Are you sitting on the couch all the time? Are you watching TV all the time? Is your brain constantly thinking negative thoughts about yourself, about what you're capable of, about what's possible for you, about your body, any of those things? So I think understanding where you are and where you're starting is really important, and being compassionate about it, right? So I would think that it's similar to being out of physical shape. It's so easy to beat yourself up for that, to like try and go out for a run and recognize that that's never going to happen in day one, right? Don't we have this idea? We're like, I'm going to go run for a mile. Like there's no way I could go out there and run for a mile. But just having a look at where you are physically, having what you're capable of fitness-wise with compassion is very similar to looking at your brain. And a lot of my clients will start looking into their brain and seeing how negative their thinking is about themselves, about everything in their life, and they'll just want to give up immediately. So I think in that way, it's really similar, that it requires practice and repetition and consistency.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I mean, one of the things that I know you do with your clients, and I also do with my clients, is if you're practicing thinking a new way, that like literally just say, okay, I'm going to practice this 100 times, right? To like build up the muscle, that thought muscle of making that new way of thinking a habit. Because the first time you do it, it feels kind of weird and awkward. And you're like, no, that's bullshit. Like, I don't want to do it that way. And just to kind of follow back to a point that you said about when you run without headphones, it's so interesting because many of my runners run with headphones, because if they don't, their brain is like, when is this going to be over? This hurts. This is hard. I want to stop. And if they're listening to music, they're distracted from all that mind chatter. They don't even realize it's going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because it's kind of good to know that like when your brain isn't distracted with music, that it's just sitting there like being kind of shitty and mean.
Yeah. And I can totally understand that, not wanting to go on a run because you don't want to listen to your brain talk to you out loud. Like I totally understand that. But here's something that I want to offer that I think is super interesting is if you are just beginning to do anything, whether it's running or doing thought work or, riding a unicycle, whatever it is, if you are able to watch yourself from outside of yourself, that is a skill that you have to practice, because so much of the time we have all of this like hate chatter going on in our brain, and we think that that's who we are. And when we're able to kind of step out of that and watch ourselves run and watch ourselves think while we run, it's so fascinating to notice like, wow, you're so slow. You can't do this. This hurt too much. You're never going to be capable. There's no way you'll ever be able to run a mile or whatever it is. And if you can watch yourself have those thoughts with compassion, that changes everything. And that sounds like it should be pretty easy to do, but it's so challenging because we think, right? It's like we think we are our thinking. We think, so like, for example, if you have a thought that says, I'll never be able to run, I'm not a runner, running is hard, which is kind of my negative, chatter that goes on in my brain about running. And I think about it a lot. It was actually the other day, a coyote ran out in front of my dog and my dog took off after it. And I was sprinting through the woods, chasing my dog and screaming at the top of my lungs, which both take a lot of energy and a lot of focus. And what I realized is like, I really can run. And I can run really fast. And I'm actually in pretty good shape when my head isn't in the way.
Yes.
Right? Because I was totally focused on saving my dog's life from impending doom. All of a sudden I was like, wow, I'm way more capable than I allow myself to believe. Yeah. And so I'm sure that's true for so many of the people that you're working with.
I think it is. And I think it's that, and it goes right back to the mental fitness, to change how your brain is thinking about yourself, to change that negative self-talk, you have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable in the moment and listen to self-talk. And to get better as a runner, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable in the beginning, because it's way easier to sit on the couch. It's just, that is a circumstance. Not even my opinion. Like, it's a medical fact. And so it's that willingness to be uncomfortable. And so, I mean, that actually kind of brings me to something that I'd love to discuss further. My take on that negative self-talk, the sort of that mean voice in the head, is I just call it the inner mean girl, right? And to me, that's a way of sort of distancing yourself from the voice so that you can listen to it and just pretend it's somebody talking to you instead of the voice in your head. But I think there are a lot of times when, so maybe the inner mean girl is saying like, oh, you're too slow to be a real runner. You'll never run a mile or whatever. And we want to change that opinion, but it seems like getting to that belief of like, oh, you could run a mile is just way too much, like it's too much of a jump. And I mean, what do you suggest for people who are like, you can't just tell me just to change my mind and believe that I can do it, because I can't do it now. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I love this question. I think that a lot of times when you start observing yourself think, you'll notice that you're having a thought like you'll never be able to run a mile, for example. And one of the things that I like to do is question the thought without trying to change it, right? Like, oh, that's not a good thought, I'm going to get a new one. It's like, why are you thinking that? Do you know that that's a choice? Why are you thinking that? And most of the time we will come back and say, well, because of my past. I've never been able to run a mile before. Right? There's all this evidence as to why we've never been an athlete. I was never able to do it in school, or whatever it is, the story that you have about it. And when you ask yourself, okay, but what do I want? What do I want to do? Why am I living from my past and just repeating it? I want to run a mile. And if you can change your thought from you'll never be able to, which you believe, to I want to, which you can also believe, they're both in your mind pretty equally true. Instead of trying to jump to I will run a mile, which your brain's like, and you can't you can pretend that you believe it, but you don't. But what you can think on purpose and deliberately is I want to run a mile. I want to run a mile. And you start living from your future and from your truest desires, and you stop living from the past, which is just on repeat in your mind when you're not supervising your mind. And this is really important as kind of a sales technique that I have for all of you guys listening to encourage you to do this. If you don't supervise your mind, if you don't pay attention to what you're thinking, it just repeats. Like, it likes to be efficient. So it just is like, let's just run that script that we've been running our whole life. Now, if you notice that script is really negative, you'll just keep creating those emotions and that effect in your life. But when you start supervising your brain, you can just change it just a little bit. Okay, I know that we believe that I'm loathsome and awful and super fat and will never be able to run. You're like, and don't even try and argue with it. Just be like, yes, all that is true. And I want to change some of it. And I want to see what I can do. I want to see what I'm capable of. I want to see if my future can be different than my past. And I think that just gives you enough of a shift where you're not going from, oh my gosh, I'm so fat and ugly and I'm out of shape, to I'm beautiful. I can run. I'm a gazelle, right? Which your brain is like, no, you're not. But you can just go from that space to I hate my body to I have a body, and then go from there. So one of the easiest ways to kind of what we call ladder from one negative thought to a different thought is just to say what you want and to give yourself permission to say it out loud. Whatever that is, whatever's true for you, say it out loud. Now, I don't mean say it to anybody else. Saying it to yourself will conjure up enough criticism. Just stay with yourself for a minute until you can actually start believing a little bit. Then you might want to share it with somebody else.
Oh, I love that. And that's almost like the concept of repetitions, right?
Yes.
Like that practicing thinking that new way. And then, so when somebody's like practicing a new thought, they're practicing like kind of, I always say to my clients, like, I just want you to install some new software in your brain.
Yes.
Like, instead of like, let's just make it a program that we're running. But sometimes you install it and then there's a glitch and the old program starts running. Like you go back to version 2 when you want to be on version 3. Like, right. And then there's this whole like, oh, it's not working because I still have these old negative thoughts. I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So anytime you have the thought you're not going to be able to do it, you just go, yeah, but I really want to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to do it. Yeah, but I really want to be able to do it. And the other thing is you have to keep supervising your mind and telling it what to think on purpose. One of the best things you can do, especially for runners, is you go out and you choose to think something 10 times, 20 times, 100 times. That is the most powerful thing to do. If you go running and you're like, I want to be able to run a mile. I want to be able to run a mile. I want to be able to run a mile. And you get just a cadence going with it. You just keep thinking it and thinking it and thinking it. You'll notice maybe in the beginning, and I'll share a story with you that really applies to how this affected me in my life on a different topic, but it's exactly the same kind of brain management, is I came up with this idea that I could make $100 million. And when I first decided that this would be a possibility for me, my body literally rejected it. It's kind of like some of you that haven't ever started running and you're like, I can run a mile, but your body's like,
error.
Thought error. That's not going to happen. So I'm like, why? There are people that make $100 million. Why not a life coach from Dallas? Why not? Right? And my brain's like, reject, the body tenses up against it. But the more I talked about it, the more I said it, the more I repeated it, the more I said, I want to make $100 million in a year. I want to be an example of what is possible. I want to make, now my brain is very comfortable. It's like, oh, here we go again with the $100 million. I guess not. And when we talk about it, I'm just really comfortable with it now. So I didn't start with, I will make $100 million because it was just too much of a leap. But I want to, and it's possible that I could, is what I started with. And like you said, I just repeated it over and I talked aloud about it and I told everybody that I can. So if you are someone that has this impossible goal for yourself, let's say it's running a marathon, you just start saying, I want to run a marathon. I'm going to run a marathon someday. And you say it 100 times. And then you start saying it to other people. Well, I'm going to run a marathon. And you'll notice yourself tensing up and your answer is, but I'm going to run a marathon. And if you live from the future, if you live from that possibility, right now it's an impossibility, but if you live from that possibility, you start identifying as someone who could actually do that thing. And it literally changes your brain, not just metaphorically, but literally changes the neural pathways in your brain. So yes, repetition, but you have to believe it. You can't just have an affirmation where you're like, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful. That will never work. Because what you're really saying is, I'm beautiful. No, you're not. I'm beautiful. No, you're not. I'm beautiful. No, you're not.
Right. And then it's just additional pain and suffering.
Yes.
Not only are you thinking the negative thought, then you're arguing with yourself about
it. That's right.
Never fun. It's so funny that the $100 million story, because almost every single one of my clients that has run a marathon is literally, that's how it started. They'll send me a text in the middle of the night. This has literally happened more than once.
That's awesome.
I saved them. I get a text in the middle of the night that says, I just woke up and thought of this crazy idea. What if I ran a marathon?
Yeah.
And then I'll wake up, in the morning and I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, you said it out loud. So
yeah.
I'm afraid there's nothing else to do but go and do it. And then we go to work on okay, how do you start living like somebody who's going to run a marathon?
Yes. Yes. And I want to just say something to that because I love the work that you do. Like a lot of people will think it doesn't matter if I run a marathon. Running a marathon isn't a big deal. I don't need to run a marathon to prove that I'm a runner or anything like that.
Mhm.
I just want to say that picking a goal like running a marathon, which is outrageously ridiculous in my opinion, just like making $100 million is, that's why we do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because once you say, I could run, 26 freaking miles?
26.2.
26 miles. Your brain rejects it, but then you start identifying that you can believe something that you don't yet believe, and that skill and then executing on it isn't about the marathon, it's about you. And that's why it matters. Who cares about the marathon? What I care about is that you made that choice and you went and did that. And here's the other thing about a marathon, and this is true, you guys, for any goal that you pick. You pick a goal that you know is going to hurt in the doing of it. And you do it anyway. That's the magic, because you know at the end that you will be proud of yourself. You will like high five yourself, and no one can take that away from you. And let me tell you, if I had run a marathon, I would think about it all the time. No matter what happened, I'd be like, yeah, but I ran a marathon.
You just wear the race medal everywhere.
I'd be like, yeah, but you know what I did? You're like, yeah, I might have just gotten a car wreck, but I did run a marathon.
Nice. I mean, I kind of believe everyone should be that way about their accomplishments. Like, yeah, but did you know this about me?
Yeah.
I ran a marathon.
Yeah. I was willing to go through that discomfort for myself alone, right? Yeah. For me and my relationship with myself, I was willing to do that too. I love that feeling of being proud of myself and signing up for something super hard. We don't sign up for a marathon because it's easy. That's what I love about it, right? Or even running a 5K, anything, if you're out of shape, like any goal, we don't sign up for goals like that because they're easy. We sign up because they're hard and who we have to become in order to achieve it. So good. Love it.
It is good. And I think a lot of the time we sign up and we think, we either say, oh, I'm going to, I want to run a marathon because it's going to make me happy, or I want to lose weight because it's going to make me happy, or whatever it is. I want to earn $100 million because it's going to make me happy. And like, sure, you're going to be happy as fuck when you get there. Like that's
right.
That's a given, right? But like, that's not the reward in my mind. It is that person that you become. You become the person who can like set big goals, keep their commitment to themselves, and do hard things, and like apply that over and over again. Like to me, that's the real reward. It's not like
totally
not like the happiness at the end, because you can be happy a million different ways. You don't have
Oh my God. And if you are trying to run a marathon, first of all, it doesn't sound like it should go in the same sentence, but if you're running a marathon in order to be happy, you're very right? Because when we start associating with happy, we're like, well, what would make me really happy is to just sit on the couch with Netflix. Why bother with the marathon? I could just be happy right here, right? Yes. We don't do it for the happy. And it's not that pleasure happy, right, that we get from eating an Oreo. It's the genuine, like, deep sense of pride that is that true, sustainable happiness that doesn't come from outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
So worth it.
For sure. All right. Well, now I kind of have a question for you, because when we're talking about like setting these big goals, right? And we know upfront, like I'm signing up for a marathon, it's not going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of times along the way when I'm going to quit or I'm going to want to quit, right? At the beginning, you're like super motivated. The first month of training goes easy, and then you have that first 10-mile training run and you're like, what is happening, right? And then the inner mean girl starts up.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to start managing our brain. And so, I mean, what do you say to somebody who's like, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard. When in reality, they kind of like, I'm just going to give that to you and see what you have to say.
Well, I think that's life, right? There are people who listen to that voice and stop and quit. And there's people that plan on that voice and are willing to go through the discomfort of it. I always say that discomfort is the currency to achieving our dreams. So this idea that you're going to go on a 10-mile run, it's going to be hard. And your brain's going to want to quit, and your brain's going to tell you to go back and sit down and relax on the couch, and none of this is necessary. But if you know your brain is going to do that, that's the key, right? You anticipate it. And it's kind of like, that's okay. And I have found in my own life, the thing that solves all of this the best is when I make a commitment, it's not optional to quit. I just don't give myself that option. And I will tell you that when is it okay to quit? Never, unless you're injured, right? Never. Mm-hmm. That it takes away so much of the brain chatter because you stop the negotiation, you stop the justification, you stop the excuses. You're just like, listen, this is hard as hell and we're running 10 miles today. And that's it. Or you give yourself whatever, how are you going to handle it when you come up against that? You have a plan for it ahead of time. That's what mental fitness is about, is anticipating the physical pain. The physical pain of running is a bummer. I know this because I was chasing that coyote.
It does get better. It starts to feel good.
But here's the thing. What is way more painful than the physical pain is your brain commentary on it.
Yeah.
Because I want you guys to think about this. You're running and let's say you're aching a little bit. You feel a little sore, the muscles. And that, if you think about what that feels like, it's kind of bothersome. But then your brain's like, oh my God, we're probably going to die. This is awful. This is terrible. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I just went from 0 to 1,000,000 just from one little ache in my body. Yep. So I think that paying attention to that, you're like, yeah. And planning on what you want to think when your body starts aching. This is part of the process. Mm-hmm. This is going to hurt. We can handle hard things. We can handle a little bit of pain. We can handle our body adjusting and getting stronger. It was like my son, he worked out the other day and he's like, I genuinely can't move my arms. You did it right. He's like, is it supposed to hurt this much? I'm like, yes. He's like, oh, okay. Nothing's gone wrong here. Yeah. This is what getting in shape feels like.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of the drama happens, is when we have these thoughts that oh, this is really hard, I want to quit. And we think that something is wrong.
Yes.
With thinking that, how about that's just your brain operating as designed.
Yes.
Well done, brain, right?
Yes.
You can override it, but it's just, right? It's just following evolution. So,
well, and I mean, isn't it interesting that we used to have to run away from things? We used to have to run towards things, right? So this brain chatter was irrelevant. We're like, run or die.
Yeah, right.
Right? This is what's going to happen. And so now it's we have to recognize that there's very few chances that we are forced into excellence. We are probably not going to be excellent unless we make a decision to be so. And in order to make that decision, you're going to have to come up against your brain telling you that everything should be going the other direction. It's everything. This is what I'm always saying to my students. It's everything that got us here alive is now going to kill us if we keep listening to it. Because your brain's constantly saying, go back in the cave, lay down, stay away from people, stay away from anything you don't recognize, stay away from new stuff, right? Yeah. Don't run if you don't have to.
Yeah, it's right, because you don't run if you have to conserve resources, right? If you have to hunt for your food, running is a luxury. It is not.
Yes. Yes. Go back in the cave, lay down.
Yes.
And we're like, okay.
I know, right? Where's the Netflix?
Good idea.
So funny. So I just kind of had this sort of epiphany that the work that you do, the work that you teach is kind of like a personal trainer for your brain.
Totally.
Or a running coach for your brain.
Yes, right? Totally.
So if you have a big goal, you're just going to sit down and come up with a training plan that is going to take into account all of the obstacles that are going to come up. And some of those might be mental obstacles. I think running is 80% mental and only 20% physical.
I bet you're right. I don't know from personal experience. But I'll tell you why I don't run is because of a bunch of really negative chatter in my brain, right? And so I think that's about running. And I haven't sat down and had a conversation with myself about that. But I think when you make a decision that you want to be a runner, and I love that you say this in your work too, in order to be a runner, the only thing you have to do is run. And nobody can tell you can't run. Nobody can tell you that you're too big to run or that you're not an athlete or you don't have the right outfit or whatever. And I love that. I just think that I am woman, I will run.
Yeah. Exactly.
And nobody can tell me otherwise. The only thing that's going to tell you that you can't do it is your own brain. And if you can overcome that, then everybody else is easy, I think.
Yeah. Because nobody else is in your head except for you.
Right.
Right. So let's just listen.
You're it's a disaster in there.
And I know it is. It's open the closet door and you're I can't look at that. I'm going to close it. But it's worth it to take everything out of the closet unpack it.
Well, and one of the other reasons why it's totally worth it is then when other people are like, you're overweight, right? You're going to go for a run, right? You're like, listen, you're going to have to get up a lot earlier in the morning to try and be mean to me because my brain is way meaner than you will ever be to me. And that's totally how I feel. Yeah. It's like, people are like, you're never offended. I'm like, no one comes close to offending me because of my own brain is so mean to my own self and always has been. It's so fascinating how our brains do that. Don't spend any time trying to figure out why. I've spent enough time with all of us. There is no answer as to why.
It just is.
It just is.
Circumstance.
Change your mind about it. Yes.
Yeah. So right. And I think the sooner that you accept that brains are mean, brains are kind of jerks and assholes. Yeah. Like just accept it and then you can move on. Right. Yeah. Like, if you're somebody who's 5'10", you don't spend your whole life thinking, oh, how can I be 5'4", right? Or if you're 5'4", I guess you could just wear heels, which I do. But, but right, like there are things in life that we just accept and we just move on, and we don't spend hours and hours obsessing over it. And I think,
well, I mean, there are some people who are 5'10" that obsess about being shorter, but it's a complete waste of time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. It's like your brain is going to give you a lot of negative things. That's a C. Right? That's a circumstance. When I say the C, we're talking about that's a fact. What you do with those negative things, if you obey them and react to them and listen to them, that's on you. Mm-hmm. Your brain doing it is not on you, but you reacting and listening and living your life by that is on you because you have a choice. Once you recognize that, you have a choice whether you're going to listen to that voice or not.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I think that is the key message, is that we always have a choice in what we can. It's literally the only choice that we have.
Right.
At all on the planet.
That's what we do have control over.
Yeah, it's like the one thing. And so let's rock and roll with that.
Totally. And like we said, like you need to get in shape. You need to get your brain in shape. You need to give yourself time and be patient and be compassionate with yourself for all that negative thinking. There's nothing wrong with you if you have a bunch of negative thinking at all. It just means you're human. But you can change it. I remember when I had that epiphany, like, what? I can change what I think? That is amazing. Why didn't anybody tell me that? It seems so obvious once you know. Yeah. Wow, like I can go on a run and not hate on myself the entire time. Yeah. Maybe I'll just hate on myself 50% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Like it's like you can dial it in. Like you can say, all right, we're just gonna hate 20% less this time.
Yeah.
So
because sometimes I teach my students to do what I call a thought download. I'm like, and I sometimes say this to myself. I'm like, all right, I'll hear you out. What do you got? Tell me all the negative things. Tell me all the horrible things, all the things you're afraid of, all the things you're worried about, all the things you don't like. I'll hear you out and then we're done. And I think that that's powerful. And I think like if you can go on a run and just let it all drain out of your brain, then you come back, you feel better physically, mentally. It's beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I love that so much.
So good.
All right. And I think on that note, like we've covered it.
We've covered everything.
So if you've been listening to this, you're fixed, go forth. And
if you're not fixed, you just turn this podcast on whenever you go for a run for like the next 10 days. Just listen to us tell you all of this stuff. Because if you can learn this, right? If you can learn everything else is easy, I'm telling you. Yeah. This is the hardest part. And I do think, here's the other thing. Let's end on this.
Okay.
And just like managing your mind, you don't do it once and then you're fit. You have to keep going out for that run every single day. You have to keep managing your mind every single day. You never get to the point in running where you're like, I thought I was fit now. I could stop.
Right.
You have to keep running. Just stay fit. It's the same with your brain.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the perfect analogy for sure.
So good.
So you guys, that I know a lot of you listen to my podcast while you're running, and I just need you to know that Brooke's podcast is what I listen to when I am running.
Oh, good.
And
so I do go running, y'all. See?
You do go running.
I love it.
The time. In fact, sometimes I like have to stop and like type out notes.
That's awesome.
I'll be like, I gotta stop running for a second because I gotta get that truth bomb down. But for real, so I mean, Brooke's podcast is just like one truth bomb like this after another, and it will literally change your life, or it will give you the tools to change your own life. Brooke, where can people get more of you? I mean, I mentioned the podcast, but I'd love for you to kind of talk people through like what's the best way for them to do this work that you teach.
Yeah,
it's really
totally.
important.
So the podcast is on iTunes at thelifecoachschool.com or the Life Coach School podcast. And then you can also go to thelifecoachschool.com and learn more about my program called Self-Coaching Scholars, if you want to check out that. And then all the podcasts are there as well, if you want to look at those. But yeah, that's the best way to find me. I think I am on Instagram, but I'm not really on there. Don't find me there. Find me on my podcast. That's the best way to find
Follow
me.
her on Instagram though, because there are some really good, I screenshot your Instagram posts all the time.
Oh, good.
Oh, and
good.
wait, I got to tell you about this like super cool app that I just found. It's called Clips, I think.
Oh,
Clips.
nice.
And so basically, I mean, you can do a million things with it, but what I do is I take these little screenshots of Instagram memes that I think are awesome,
Yeah.
like discomfort is the currency to growth,
Yes.
that kind of stuff. And then you can have them just play with music behind them. You can turn them into a little video. It's so easy. And
Stop
so
it.
I know. So like when I work on like the new belief system that I want to install in my brain for myself, I put it on these little memes and then I put it to like Beyonce or something in the background.
Brilliant.
Like watch it and read them kind of going through over and over again. So just everyone.
So my Instagram is what? At the Life Coach School?
It is. I think it's at the Life Coach School. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See, I knew that.
Yeah.
And with that, this podcast has been brought to you by Clips.
I know. I should reach out to them. Get a little kickback on that. But yeah, thank you so much, Brooke. This has been, first of all, I've learned a lot. And every time I'm around you, I learn a lot. But like,
Yay.
I am just like, cool that I love like so much of what we discussed today. And I'm going to be implementing this with all of my clients immediately. So get ready, all of you.
Awesome. I love it. And I love you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Rebels. Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Brooke. And if you want to get more of her magic, you can find all of it at www.thelifecoachschool.com. Don't forget the. You can find links to the podcast the amazing podcast that she has, lots of free resources. And even if you want to become a life coach as well, you can find out exactly how to do that at her website. And again, that is www.thelifecoachschool.com. And of course, all those links are at notyouraverage.runner.com/25. And you can just head on over there and click them if you want. I will talk to you next week. Happy running. And we'll be back to some really cool stuff, exploring what it means to be a rebel runner. I'm going to teach you everything I know, starting with episode 26. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Not Your Average Runner podcast. If you liked what you heard and want more, head over to www.notyouraverage.runner.com to download your free 1-week jumpstart plan and get started running today.